Peter is like us. We don't want bad things to happen. And so when he hears Jesus' plans to go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed and on the third day be raised, well, Peter doesn't want any part in it. It would seem that God's plans don't match his. He responds by saying, God forbid it, but quickly learns that his ways are inferior to God's ways. Jesus even telling him in rebuke, "Get behind me, Satan." You see, Peter has plans for Jesus. He has planned it all out. In his mind, Jesus truly is the Messiah, the Son of the living God that they have been waiting for. And so now it's up to Jesus to do what Peter and everybody else expect the Messiah to do. They want their freedom from the powers of oppression. They want Jesus, God, to be lifted up, to be the rightful king of the world, and they want to sit back and watch their hard work pay off. I mean, they put in the time and devotion. Well, Jesus wasn't known by anybody. So when he finally takes his reign, Peter and the others probably want their share in the glory as well. Peter is struggling here to learn that his plans aren't going to happen. Jesus isn't going to operate in the ways that the disciples want. Instead, he's going to go get himself killed. In their minds, the one thing that the real Messiah just can't do if he really is the Messiah. It's a miracle that any of Jesus' followers even stay on here. It's a miracle that they don't just get up and leave now, because we can see that they don't really want a part in Jesus' plan that leads to the cross. They don't really want to follow Jesus, picking up their own crosses and suffering. Besides, just when did suffering become a part of the plan? Well, it would seem that Peter doesn't want any part of that. He is stuck on the construct of salvation from the human perspective. He wants a salvation that leads to glory in this life. And Jesus' plans don't seem like they're going to get him there. Peter can't see past the part where Jesus will be killed. He gets stuck on his death and misses the part in the plan of the resurrection. It would seem that Peter simply doesn't get it, that his mind truly is stuck on human things and can't yet understand the divine plan. If the plans were up to Peter, the cross would have never happened. And we know, sitting in a history on the other side of Jesus' death and resurrection, that if Peter had gotten his way, if Peter would have been the one who got to plan salvation, he would have screwed it all up. Because without the cross, there is no resurrection. There is no salvation. Without the cross, we would be sitting here today without the assurance that God really can understand our human suffering. Without the cross, we would never have learned that God knows what it is like to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" We would never get to witness that Jesus actually knows what it's like to cry out to God and not hear a response back. Without the cross, there would have been no Easter morning. Without the cross, we would not be here today in this church, praising the one who proved to us that the powers of sin and death are conquered. Yep, if Peter had gotten his way, he would have screwed it all up. It's a good thing that he didn't. It's a really good thing that life and salvation unfold under the wisdom of God, because if it was left up to us, we would probably miss the whole point. It's been said that if you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. If you want to make God laugh, tell God your plans. And I think that there is some deep truth to this saying. Because as humans, we are flawed. We are sinful. We are greedy, and we are pretty short-sighted. We, and by we I definitely include myself, often look to the future with grandiose ideas, thinking that there are no crosses ahead, thinking that if I only plan and work hard enough that I might actually get a piece of heaven on earth, or maybe some of that earthly glory that Peter wanted so bad. But the problem with this, though, is that we aren't often willing to admit that our futures are going to be hard. When it comes down to it, we plan retirements on the beach. We invest to be millionaires. We marry thinking that this is going to finally make my life complete. We think that there are all of these pretty easy solutions to life. But in the end, I think we all know that we are trying to create a future that will not happen. We are trying to forget that we really do have a cross in our future, that we really will die one day. Like Peter, our minds are most often set on human things and can't yet understand the divine plan. And because of this, we most often screw it all up. We live for a future that is not real, a future that doesn't include the cross. In America, we plan for our retirements on the beach so that we can enjoy time with family then, but miss out on the fun today. In America, we invest to be millionaires, putting in 60 hours or more a week, too often with our heads down, missing the world that we were put in to see and experience. We want to think that our efforts, our plans, are the answers to the suffering that we experience, but they aren't. Jesus is the only answer to our suffering. Jesus is the only way that we will ever one day get to experience heaven on earth. Jesus is simply the only way. But our plans too often keep us from him and the cross. Simply put, we screw it up. If you haven't already, you will hear me say, if it were left up to me, I know I'd screw it up. And that's because when I look back on my life so far, remember, hindsight is 20/20. I see the only places where I have had any real success were despite my intentions and plans. If I had graduated college how I planned, the first time I would have never met my wife. Thank God that God had better plans. If I had planned the exact time to have children, I wouldn't have the ones that I have today. Thank God that God had better plans. If I had kept to my plan, as I had after college to never go back to school again, I would never have gone to seminary and become a pastor. And again, thank God that God had better plans. You see, I know for a fact that I have screwed a lot of things up, and I know that I will screw even more up in the future. And for that reason, I really do want to leave the planning up to God. I know that God does an infinitely better job of planning than I do. Because you see, God doesn't let me sidestep the trouble. God doesn't let me lead a cushy life, but instead tells me to pick up my cross and follow him. God knows the real value that comes from persevering, that comes from the struggles that I wouldn't plot on my map if I were given the choice. Peter misses the point of salvation. He wasn't able to get past the death part and see that in the end, salvation will happen in a way that he could never have dreamt of, through the resurrection. He wanted to miss out on both the worst and best thing that ever happened in history, the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The death and resurrection that opened the way of heaven for us. The death and resurrection that brings a salvation that goes beyond our human ability to understand. A death and resurrection through which we are given the faith to know and trust that God is with us and that one day we will truly and fully be healed and restored. God's plans don't match yours. And if you're like me, that's a really good thing. Because if it were up to us to write history, we would screw it up. Just think about it. If it were up to us, we would have even been missing the cross. We would have missed out on the whole purpose of life, salvation and all. Thank God that God has better plans than we do. Amen.